Good evening. Welcome to Words on Whiskey, episode 58. And I think we've got a very important and auspicious guest with us this evening. And we're going to be discussing all things IWA, Irish Whiskey Association, related to proposed amendments to the technical file, which will basically lay out the future for Irish whiskey over the next many years, we hope, unless, of course, it gets amended again. But our guest this evening is none other than Mr. John Quinn, probably better known as being Global Brand Ambassador at W. Grant in Tullamore. And he's agreed to come onto the show and fill us in on exactly what is happening with the Irish Whiskey Association in relation to amendments to the technical file. So we're honoured to have Chairman of the Irish Whiskey Association, Mr. John Quinn. Good evening, sir.
Don't be honoured. Give me a break.
Well, we are. We don't get chairman that often. So how are you keeping?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sergis. In good form. Thanks be to God. Healthy, which is
the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I had a holiday in Portugal 10 days ago, and I'm still living off the benefits of that, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say I can see the tan, but I think you must have had too good a time.
I had a very good time, indoors and outdoors, I can tell you. We had a lot of golf, we had a good bit of swimming, and we did some what we call trade auditing. Well, I was calling it trade auditing. The lads didn't know what that meant, but I think you get the picture. Yeah.
Well, look, we were delighted to have Ongar on last week on the show from Tullamore, who you know well, and he had suggested we do the show in French, but Ongar, apologies, we won't be doing that. But only because it's technical. Only because it's technical subject matter. Otherwise, there would be no problem.
No problem whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, I'm going to note the occasion by having one of my favorites. I think the Tullamore DEW 18-year-old single malt, and I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to compete with you. I'll go for the 12-year-old.
Okay. Well, I went something that was a little bit closer to my age, John. Slightly younger.
I'm not going there. Anyway.
Well, look, thank you everybody for joining us on the show. I think it's an important topic, and if you do have questions or comments about the technical file, please do put them in. I think it'd be great to get some debate going about this and get some opinions. So, John, firstly, your role as chairman of the Irish Whiskey Association came into force at the beginning of the year, and probably one of the most challenging years we've had with the COVID situation going on and other factors as well. There's the Brexit situation to deal with as well. Could you tell us a little bit firstly about your role within the Irish Whiskey Association, how it came about, and what it entails and what you are responsible for?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, the previous chairman was David Stapleton of Connacht Whiskey. He asked me, would I step up as vice chair to him with the view to me being the chairman 2 years after being vice chairman. So I was delighted and honoured to do that. The company was very happy for me to be the Tullamore DEW person that would do that. It could have been anybody from William Grant, really. I think there was a bit of a sense that maybe it would be me within the Irish Whiskey Association, and as I say, William Grant were delighted to allow that happen. It's a significant thing because it takes a lot of my time away from my paid role, as it were. So that was great. And in terms of, so it's a 2-year gig. After you've been vice chair for 2 years, you're chair for 2 years. 1 year just about to be completed now in December, and then it goes through till December 22. When a new chairman will take over.
Yeah, and that will be the vice president, who is James Doherty.
The vice chairman is James Doherty from Sleep League, exactly. And it was in my gift to find somebody who would, from the smaller companies, every 2 years it becomes a bigger company and a smaller company, etc. So it was within my gift to talk to people, and I identified James as somebody who has a great affinity with the small producers, a great understanding of the business globally, and also has a good understanding of what makes the bigger companies tick as well. So I was happy to ask James, and I was delighted he said yes. He's a very brilliant man, actually. For those who don't know him, they will know him in the future. He's a very, very brilliant man at loads of levels. And so the role then of the chairman is like, I sometimes say to people, I'm really the eye candy but then nobody believes that, so I have to change that line. And it's more though that I as chair, I kind of oversee in a way that is not detached from the everyday, but keeping an eye on the way the organization conducts itself in terms of where the priorities are. And I sit particularly with William Lavelle, his team, Caroline Madigan and Miriam Mooney. I mean, they're the people I would spend most time with, but particularly with William, understanding where do we need to go, what's the next 5 years going to look like in order to get there, what do we have to do this year and the year after, etc. And it's driven by that executive, not really by me. I sit in a kind of an overseeing capacity, and if I have anything to offer in terms of inspiring any of the thoughts going forward, then I can do that, obviously. But it's a pretty good team, to say the least. It's actually a very good team of people that drive the whole association forward. Under William.
And obviously the membership has grown hugely over the last number of years. I think you're 46 members.
46 members now, yeah. And it's the number of members is significant, but I guess what we represent is even more significant. I mean, we represent, I think it's going to go something like 98% of the sales of Irish whiskey, 95% of the production of Irish whiskey, and 96% of the employees in the Irish whiskey business, so it's a very representative body. Actually, I've heard it said that is the most representative trade body in Ireland and possibly in the British Isles, and indeed possibly in Europe, that it represents so many people. And then there are people who aren't members, who are actively working really well in the Irish whiskey industry and doing brilliant work on their own, in their own way. And they've chosen, for whatever reason, not to be members. And we recognize the value of them too, of course, and the value of what they're doing.
Yeah, of course. And we've seen the formation of a number of other bodies, I guess, over the last couple of years. And I'm sure that they will have their voice as well in their technical file and also in suggestions to help develop the category. But
they're people who are working actively in the industry, so they will have thoughts and feelings about what's right and what's appropriate, and in the way that we have, obviously.
Yeah. So in terms of actually what's happened this year, let's not talk about the technical part at the moment, but in terms of the challenges that have been there with COVID, obviously all meetings, I presume, have gone virtual. I've seen a lot of workshops, which is a lot of credit to you all to organize the workshops. I've attended a couple of them, which have been fantastic. And
it's all been sorry to interrupt you, but it has all been virtual because it had to be.
Yeah.
But I think in a funny kind of a way, Sergius, that's worked to our advantage. And I say that because if we were having a workshop in Middleton or in Tullamore or in Teelings in Dublin or Liberties in Dublin, name a distillery, there would be people who couldn't get there for reasons of geography as much and time as much as anything else. Whereas with online, everyone can get there. You go from your kitchen to your office or your sitting room or your bedroom or whatever happens to be, and you're there. You're in Cork or you're in Bushmills or wherever it happens to be. You know what I mean? So if wherever there's anything going on virtually, you can be there without the challenge of time and distance.
Yes, and you can be there in your shirt and your pajama bottoms and.
I'm not even going to move my camera now. It's not moving my camera. Okay. But and gave us an opportunity then. We had a lot of stuff online, as you said. We had a lot of webinars, seminars, people contributing from different markets, from Africa, from Asia, from Australia, people contributing with different expertise, laboratory people, and people talking about sustainability. So we had a huge amount of stuff going on that everybody could call into. It was really super.
Yeah, like I said, I attended a couple of them, and they really gave. I really enjoyed the one on global travel retail. I thought it was a fascinating insight, which is of course a huge market. But I mean, the other role then that the IWA take on is protection of the GI and protection of the category Irish whiskey, and they have gained recognition of the Irish whiskey trademark essentially in many markets now, and that's ongoing with the legal department. So I'm sure that takes a lot of the resources that would be required.
It's a huge amount of resources. There's no doubt about it. I think in the last 5 years, we spent €1 million in the interest of protecting Irish whiskey, registering and protecting Irish whiskey. So the members have contributed €1 million to this effort. And so you'd have to say, like, it's not just a commitment from the heart. That's hard cash that the members have put up front. And what we do, of course, is we register Irish whiskey in wherever it needs to be registered, where we don't have protection for the category. We register the GI. It's recognized in so many countries now. We're in the process now. I think it's South Africa, Australia, and India are in the process of registration at the moment. I mean, we are selling whiskies in those markets already. The thing is, are they protected by law? And by registering the GI in these markets, as we have in so many others, that means it is protected by law. And our members, and not just our members, obviously anyone in the business who wants to launch an Irish whiskey in any market where we've instigated the protection procedures, then they can launch with confidence, knowing that the category is protected by the GI that's been, registered by our members, let's say.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other thing that you do is you actually promote Irish whiskey collectively abroad, taking part in trade shows, dealing with governments. So that's hugely important.
And that was particularly challenging this year. I mean, because there were no trade shows in the last 12 months, obviously, and there was nobody traveling. So what we did do is we had some online seminars and webinars talking about Irish whiskey, and where we invited, for example, whiskey writers or tourism writers or foodie type writers. We also invited the Irish Embassy to host some of these, and that's a great fillip to the business, but it's also a great opportunity for the Irish Embassy to participate in promoting all the category, let's say. So again, the online thing served us well, because we could get, John King from CNN was on one of the webinars that won the online seminars, let's call it that. And he was listening and talking Irish whiskey. So when you get those kinds of influencers, it's huge for the category.
Yeah. And I suppose you're reaching an audience online that might be, impossible to reach almost any other way, practically.
So, sorry, I've told this story before, but I'll tell you now. You've probably heard of Kevin Piggott.
I have indeed.
A young upstart in the Irish whiskey business, but he and I do work together a bit. And we did a webinar, a seminar with a group of Chilean bartenders. And it was set up for Chilean bartenders, but it was open to anyone who wanted to, from Latin America, who wanted to call in, let's say. And we did a thing where I talked about Irish whiskey and Kevin talked about cocktails. And 357 bartenders from Latin America, from Tierra del Fuego, all the way up to Mexico, the northern, the Tijuana in Mexico, and all countries in between, called in to that. And like, if I had traveled to Santiago de Chile or whatever and asked for bartenders to come to a tasting, it would have been great. I would have got 25 one night and 45 another, and whatever. Yes. But we got 257 people calling in one evening. It was a 2-hour gig. We didn't have to leave Dublin. That's the benefits that we can see from online. And the same way that you're talking about, the people calling in from different parts of the world to listen to whiskey guys, not me, but any of the other brands of whiskey talking about their product. It was a great opportunity for the members.
Yeah, it just goes to show the interest that's out there that, can be tapped if you go online, I guess, as well.
Here. And Irish whiskey, I have to be careful with this, but it's still sexy. It's been sexy for a while now, but it's still sexy in the context of drinks writers. It's still something that's, I don't want to say novel, but it's still something that generates a little interest in beyond the normal, let's talk about a spirit category. Irish whiskey, for whatever reason, in a way that maybe Ireland does, generates an interest level where they want to participate and they want to write.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very much interwoven with Brand Ireland as well. The two go hand in hand to some extent, but certainly there's a great buzz about it, and that's the other thing that you helped as well in the tourism initiatives that have taken place over the last few months, and local tourism being important for distillery.
Yeah, I mean, we have these Ireland 360, you know, and that's all about creating a tourism product which has, good man Jay Keating,
unpaid
exactly, but so it's got all these an opportunity for people to visit the tourism product that is Irish whiskey distilleries, and now we've just instituted a pilot thing of a kind of a passport for the distilleries you might visit. So it's wonderful, and that was targeted this year at Irish people, the staycationers, for want of a better term, to encourage them, and it worked for a lot of people. Now, a lot of the time we were closed, places were closed, people couldn't visit. So whatever opportunity was there, we did our best to maximize the opportunity for our members.
Yeah. Ironically, I think the association has become more accessible and more open in lockdown. You know, I mean, we know a lot more about what's going on. There's been more transparency than ever before, I think. And of course, that's credit to yourself and William and the rest of the team as to what's happening. But
and I think we never would have wanted it to be any other way. So for whatever reason, if it seemed that there was cloak and dagger stuff going on, it didn't seem that way to us. But if that's how it seemed outside, then I'm glad it's changed, and it should continue to change.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, one of the most significant things that I want to discuss with you is proposed amendments to the technical file. And if we go back in the history, I suppose first definition of Irish whiskey would have been 1950, and then 1980 would have been the first semblance of a technical file. The current technical file dates back to 2014, I think ratified in 2019. And there's been a lot of discussion about it, of course. And, there's been discussion as to why wasn't this included and why wasn't that included. And firstly, let's talk about what the technical file is. Who owns it? Who creates it? Who ultimately has responsibility for it? And how does that work?
So the technical file was created by the Irish whiskey industry, as you said, finally in 2014. I mean, it started being discussed in 2008. It took 6 years to get it to the point where it would be submitted to the Department of Agriculture and then submitted to Europe for GI ratification. So in that sense, it's owned by the industry, and the industry came together. All the members of the industry came together back then at a time when it wasn't easy for many people. Smaller guys might have felt they were dominated by bigger guys. Bigger guys might have felt that smaller guys had interests that were different from theirs, etc. So, I mean, you talk to one of the greats of Irish whiskey, Noel Sweeney, and he'll tell you that it was a real challenge to get everybody to sit in an agreeable format, you know what I mean, and to agree on things. And he would have been one of the champions, and there were, champions from Peter Moorhead, probably from Irish Distillers, and John Chamney was with William Grant, or with Tullamore DEW at that time. So there are different champions who came together to make that happen. And it was quite an achievement for that document to be produced and presented and agreed upon. As I say, it took 6 years. So there was a lot of discussion and debate to get that.
For 20 pages? No, it's actually a lot longer than 20 pages.
Well, but in any case, it was quite an achievement to get it done.
But it was a different market. And, we look back and it's very easy to be critical looking back. And I won't say I haven't been critical of it, but, if you go back and look at it and you say, okay, there were far less players in the market, the difference between the big players and the small players was huge. And I suppose Irish whiskey at the time hadn't really reached the same levels that it has now. And obviously, we're talking about 40 distilleries plus now. So I guess to some extent, it was of its time, and maybe perhaps perceived as being suited towards the larger players. But now I know you've been working from the beginning of the year to look at the new technical file proposals that you're putting together. So, firstly, the technical file exists. It has to be approved by government, is it?
It has to be approved by the Department of Agriculture and Food, yes, by government.
Yes.
They are, if you like, the custodians of it. And the role of the technical file is it's meant to reflect the historical significance and the ways of working of the Irish whiskey industry, and has to have integrity in that sense. And it defines Irish whiskey with a nod to traditionality, more than a nod to traditionality, but encompassing and understanding and recognizing traditionality in the industry. And that technical file then informs, as I said, the application for a GI status, which absolutely demands that there is a definition, that there is an understanding of what makes Irish whiskey what it is, and that therefore deviations away from that would not be acceptable within GI status, let's say.
Yeah. So, I mean, it has two purposes then. Is one, to clarify what is allowed to be produced and how it's named, but also to try and ensure the quality as well, I presume, of the product, which is the most significant part.
Well, of course. I mean, the quality credentials of Irish whiskey have to be protected in every way, in terms of defining what it is that makes Irish whiskey, what it is that how you define the making of one category or one subcategory and another subcategory, etc. And they have to be written down, and indeed where. And then the recognition then, as time moved on, that there were flaws within the original document, and that probably as a working document it would always be that there would be a plan to revisit that and see if it's still fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened.
So I understand there were kind of time constraints as well in terms of getting the GI, getting a technical file in with the GI on time as well. But if we look at the relationship between three documents I'm particularly interested in, wouldn't it be the verification process, which is run by Revenue and HMRC? Then there is the geographical indication, and then there is the technical file. What's the relationship between those three documents?
So the technical file is written to define what makes Irish whiskey what it is and how it's made and what are the processes. Yeah. The verification file is exactly what that is, which is that we will verify that distillers and producers are making Irish whiskey in accordance with the various different sections in the technical file. So in other words, the verification file verifies that the technical file is being carried out by the producer. And then those two together are submitted with a view to the geographical indication being awarded to Irish whiskey, because it has a clear definition and there is a very clear verification process.
Okay. So it is possible to change your technical file without having to reapply for GI, or does that have to be reapplied?
So essentially, it's not possible to change it dramatically, to make massive changes to what would be understood to be the integrity of the document, and to change significantly how Irish whiskey would be made, would taste, etc., etc. If you're making massive changes, then it's not a member state discussion, it's an EU discussion, because you're going to have the GI status questioned and revised. Whereas when you're making changes that tweak or that redefine or that refine, if you like, the interpretation of what's done, then they're seen as not significant and not massively significant to the integrity of the document, and therefore they would be retained. The responsibility for those would be retained within the member state, let's say, and that the member state would accept that, and the geographical indication would be kept intact as a result. Okay.
So you collectively, as Irish Whiskey Association, have put together these proposed amendments, and we're going to go through those and talk about them. But what's the next process? So you've made your submissions. What happens next?
So what happens is that, and it's a little bit unclear in the sense that, in terms of timelines, sorry, I'm coughing. the Department of Agriculture receive our documents, as does DEFRA, the department in the UK, because it's an all-island industry, obviously. They receive our proposal to change the technical file. So if we just talk about agriculture and food, they will look at that and assess it in terms of its suitability, in terms of recognizing the integrity of the points that are being made with a view to the changes, and saying, okay, that makes sense, and we understand why that is, etc. And then they would see that as something that would be either amenable for full acceptance or not. And they would offer it then for other people to, if you like, to oppose this for any reason, and to put forward other proposals. And then anyone can then, you don't even have to be in the industry to make proposals that are different to ours. And then after that, they would set a timeline for themselves to accept the document or send it back for revision.
Okay. So the timelines in terms of, assuming that the amendments are accepted, are we talking about something taking a couple of years to go through, or something?
No, I think one of the things you can't do is, because I've asked this question myself, and I don't think we can necessarily define the timelines, because it's down to the Department of Agriculture capacity to spend time with this, etc. They'll obviously want to consult with the industry, and we'll want to consult with them and explain to them the thinking behind the document if they need any clarification, etc. They may well want to discuss with DEFRA, for example. They may well want to invite alternative views and consider those, etc. So depending on the volume of offerings and the volume of consultations that they have to get involved in, that could take an awful long time, or it could take a short time. But I think I was asking myself recently, are we talking 3 to 6 months? Are we talking 2 years? Nobody can really say, but I'd be hoping it would be in the former, somewhere around 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, excellent. And then in terms of retrospectively applying it, will that happen? Is it retrospectively applied? So, for example, if somebody had produced something that would be considered technically illegal at the moment, would that be retrospectively applied, or is it only going forward?
I think that would be something that they would have to address themselves. And I don't know the answer to that, Sergio. There's no point in me pretending I do. But I guess if something is produced in the market and is produced but not necessarily marketed, it could be that could be acceptable, because it reflects what's in the new technical file, for want of a better description. But there could be grandfathered in situations, etc. But I really wouldn't feel competent to answer that, because I think that's something that hasn't been discussed with them yet.
Right.
That's something they need to come to terms with. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of the mechanics, then, John, I understand there was a technical subcommittee set up for that. How were they appointed, and what was their role?
Well, actually, to be fair, there wasn't a technical subcommittee set up to do this. Every 2 years, when there's a change of chairman and there's a change of vice chair, etc., there's also a change of the subcommittees. So a new technical subcommittee was set up last December for the next 2 years. And it was that technical subcommittee that would address many of the technical issues that the previous technical committee would have addressed. For example, they were given a brief that it's time to open and look at the technical file and to see if it's still fit for purpose, given all that we know now that wasn't known in 2014, for example. And so they would have taken that task on board right from January right through. And it was a big job for them, obviously, to sit over, I think they sat over a 16-week period. They had, like 8 meetings of a couple of hours each meeting, with 15 different companies contributing, small and big. So there was a huge amount of executive opinion of both big and small, but also a huge amount of expertise contributing into that.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite an achievement when you think about it, with the number of members, to actually reach a consensus that all the members are happy with. And I think it shows that the Irish Whiskey Association can work. It's not levered one way necessarily or another. And
look, the term that was used for me was the collegiality of the industry, that it's almost unprecedented in terms of industry bodies in Ireland. Certainly that's the feedback we get, that to represent so much of the industry and to come together in ways that were challenging, because there are people with different views, as there were back in 2008. It didn't take us 6 years this time, but to bring together a document where there was unanimity on that document in the end was fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, with the way the demographics of the industry have changed in terms of scale and the number of new distilleries, it could have been quite easy, I suppose, to reach stumbling blocks and not want to move forward. But what was the driving force for the changes to be made in the first place? Were they consumer driven or were they industry driven?
I would say they're industry driven, and I don't want to in some way dismiss the consumer, but if Joe Bloggs in Glasnevin is the consumer, he wasn't demanding that we change the Irish Whiskey Technical File. However, there were a lot of people, well-informed people, let's pick the obvious person like Fionn O'Connor, whose research was so full of integrity and whose presentation of that research was so engaging, that we all knew that there was a need at any time. There would have been a need to review it, and last year there was a sense of, okay, let's with the new technical committee next year, let's set that as a task for them to review it. So yes, there would have been, and within that technical committee, I sat on one meeting. I didn't sit in on them all. I wasn't elected. I was sitting in as my role as chair. I was allowed to be a fly on the wall, and when I had an opinion to offer, I was more or less told to shut up. You don't have to say here, which is appropriate, of course. But it was it was that they came together, and there were times when they had to really dig deep to find agreement on issues, but they did, and that's what I say. It was a wonderful exercise in terms of the collegiality of the industry, small and big, from the smallest producers to the biggest, and that's what was great about it.
Yeah, I have to say I was really pleased, excited to hear that they had reached an agreement and that it was happening. But you mentioned earlier on that the technical file, it's important that it reflected the traditionality and the heritage and history of Irish whiskey. And I think with these amendments, I mean, it goes pretty much all the way in terms of fulfilling that requirement. Is there a question as to why it may have been overlooked before, or is it just it was what it was?
No, I don't think it was a question of things being overlooked. I think it was a question of there not being the level of expertise available to everybody, the level of research that was available to everybody back in the day. I mean, I don't want to get too prescriptive about this, or I don't want to share the flavor of. Again, I wasn't sitting in on those meetings, but you would have had big voices saying this is our way. Well, this is our way, and it can't be. Yes, it can be, and here's the tradition. Well, here's another tradition. So that very document of 2014, as I said earlier, was a tremendous achievement, as flawed as it now looks. And that whole adage of you make your decisions based on the information you have available at any one time. That was a coming together and a collegiality then that produced a document that was accepted unanimously. As time moved on and as more people came into the industry, and we had the expertise being offered to us from within and without the industry, and members and non-members who were saying, but this, and what about this, etc. And you can't ignore the integrity of somebody who has a doctorate on mash bills.
No, and I have to say, it's maybe a bit obvious because I'm consider him a good friend as well. I mean, the role that Fionn played was, if not pivotal, hugely significant in, the uptake and the awareness, I suppose, even amongst members, I'm sure, of your association. A lot of them may not have been aware of a lot of the facts that were unearthed, a lot of the traditionality that was unearthed. So that certainly played a big role, I think, going in this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, the integrity of the document gives a significant nod to traditionality. So therefore, we have to understand that traditionality. And for some people, the traditionality went back to the 1960s. And for some people, it went back to the 1800s. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to respect all of those views. And we did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue, and again, I'm being devil's advocate here and saying, well, look, that was then, this is now. What does a tradition really matter anyway? It's a liquid that we drink in a certain way. Obviously, we very much pride ourselves on having that heritage and being the first out there and so forth. But is it that important these days?
The traditionality?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it actually, not only is it important for the GI, it's required. You know what I mean? GI, it's required that the recognition of the traditionality of what informed Irish whiskey history, if you like, that is part of your if you like your reason for being and reason for having the GI status, is that you are giving due recognition to the traditionality. So that's something that it's not something that you might want to have. You're actually required to have it. Yes.
Okay. Well, look, I've done up a slide here just to go through some of the proposed amendments, John. I hope you don't mind if you wouldn't mind going through it with me and sharing it with our audience. So, I did put down proposed technical file amendments. So obviously referring to the, obviously referring to the.
And for people's information, the word technical file has now been replaced by product specification file.
Product specification.
So if that gets thrown in, for that, read technical file. Yeah.
Okay. So look, we're going to start off hard, if you like, and talk about what was the most contentious issue. And I think the most important, because, if we say pot still is unique to Ireland, then it's important that it was defined correctly. And the biggest amendment here is the pot still definition, which basically before it was 30% malt, 30% unmalted barley, and up to 5% other. And I think it was the other that was causing the controversy. So the new definition is basically saying, well, now you can have 30, 30, and 30 of other cereals. And I think that's been clarified further by saying other cereals being rye, wheat, or oats, which may or may not be malted. And then there is an amendment there to remove the word unpeated from the definition. So anything you can share with us on that?
It was the big issue. But I think, to be fair, there was an agreed recognition that the original document was too restrictive, and that it reflected very much a tradition that was in place for the past 50 years, probably. But that had we looked further back, and had we looked at the industry as it was developing throughout the 1800s, there were much different mash bills that were not widely used, and different combinations. And I, in my spare time, I had good conversations with Fionn about this, because he was going through this process in the early stages as well as in the latter stages. And Fionn's tutor happens to be a friend of mine, so we have a lot of reasons why we want to talk to each other, etc. But it was clear and made abundantly clear to the members that there was a whole range of mash bills out there, and you could even Fionn would have said to me, look, you couldn't write down them all because there were just too many potential combinations, but that a good representation would have included wheat, oats, and rye, and would have included 30-30-30 was a pretty good way to go. That would have incorporated largely everything that happened between sort of the 1850s and the 1960s. So yeah, and that was adopted and accepted, and I mean it probably was less controversial than you think, in the sense that, you know, there were views on it, and to be fair to the biggest distiller of pot still whiskey in this country, who's been distilling it from, you know, as a magnificent spirit and now a magnificent category, the guys at Middleton would have had very well-founded views on how it would look, and they would have been also very open to the archival discoveries that they themselves would have made in Middleton in their research, as well as, you know, what Finan would have, and Peter Mulryan and all these other brilliant minds who were bringing their understanding of that, the historical significance of other pot still mash bills. So it was not that it was a no-brainer, but it took a lot of discussion, and it took a lot of people being prepared to accept, etc. On the other hand, there was a lot of recognition that there is a historical significance here that we cannot ignore.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. I mean, this is the single biggest thing in it from my point of view. But just a quick one there about the removal of the unpeated from the definition. Is that just that it didn't recognize that peated whiskey was prominent?
So the fact that the word unpeated was included at all in the first place was back to the original document, where there was only one organization producing pot still whiskey, and had been for the previous 40 years, and producing a wonderful spirit, as I said, a great whiskey. And peated didn't come into the realm of their historical context in that sense, because pot still whiskies were, you know, very largely Dublin whiskies, etc., and there wasn't a lot of peated historical references there. On the other hand, to say unpeated was to define it in a way that peated wouldn't be allowed, and that wasn't historically accurate either. So to remove that meant that it could be either peated or unpeated, and I think again that was agreed.
Okay. Well, look, I think a big hats off to the association for actually putting this through it, and a lot of champions out there, you know, include Matt Healy, Charlie, obviously Fionn as well, and a lot of people. So I'll come back to this later, because I want to discuss maybe what does this mean for the consumer. So we'll come back to it, but let's talk about grain Irish whiskey. Grain Irish whiskey defined as being produced in a column still, but they're talking about removing the 30% malted barley limitation that exists on that, because there has been historical context that has shown that, you know, greater than 30% did exist. So, you know, I'm semi-excited about this, but I see where it's coming from. But it's a positive move.
I think the background to that as well was that a lot of the grain whiskey mash bills were based on sort of the brewing of a wash that was essentially going to go one of two ways, either into make grain whiskey or into make pot still whiskey. It was the same mash bill, and what was found was that with a limit of 30%, you were automatically limiting something that you didn't necessarily have to. But also the guys were, interestingly, they came to the conclusion that in the use of green malt, which would be malt that isn't kiln dried, let's say, that you could have an excess of 30% malted barley in a mash bill if you're using green malt, and to insist on dry kilning that malt would actually be to insist on the use of an excess of energy that you needed, that you didn't really need. And so
the sustainability.
Exactly. So that was one of the reasons. And again, that was agreed rather readily.
Okay. Labeling, and this is a new one. Okay, so I'll make a comment about this after. The labeling, packaging, advertising, or promotion of an Irish whiskey must not include a reference to any number if the reference to that number may create a likelihood of confusion on the part of the public as to whether the number relates to the maturation period of the Irish whiskey, blah, blah, blah. So, so what was the purpose of this, and where did this get driven from?
So, well, one of the things with not just Irish whiskey, but with whiskey globally, is that there is a general recognition that an age statement on a label indicates a maturation for a certain period. And it's particularly well policed, for example, by our Scottish friends. So, and we would want that there is no confusion with consumers when a number appears on a label, that the consumer might believe that that number refers to years of maturation, aged whiskey. So if it says 15 on the label, does that indicate 15-year-old whiskey? Because the research that we did some research in some markets, indicated to us that a majority of people did understand a number on a label being referencing the age of the whiskey that's been matured. So it's something that we absolutely would like to make sure that there is no confusion with the consumer between aged and unaged product by the use of number references that can confuse consumers. Okay.
Again, I'll come back to labeling, but I mean, and I won't make any comment about any particular brands here, but okay. So peated, I guess another one. So as a consumer myself, when you see the word peated described as a peated whiskey, you kind of automatically assume that the grain is peated, which isn't always the case. But so I guess that's just to address that. So it's basically saying peated can be used if the grain has basically been peated and has a peaty aroma, or it can be used in conjunction with cask or barrel if that flavor came about from a pre-existing whiskey that was peated.
Yeah, so, and here we're saying that in a circumstance where the mash bill included peated cereals, then the word peated can be used to describe the whiskey. In the case where the peated nature of the whiskey came from the maturation period, that would have to be featured on the label. It would have to be said on the label that this came from a peated cask, or a cask that had previously had a peated whiskey. So it's to differentiate between the two.
Okay, so the term. So I suppose at the very top it says the term can be used on condition. I suppose that should really be must.
Well, if somebody wants to say the word peated, they can't unless it
meets those conditions.
Those two conditions, and in the case of the second one, it must give reference to the cask. But if somebody doesn't want to mention peated, I don't think my understanding is it's not obligatory.
Yeah. Do you have to give the origination of that peated cask?
Now you're asking me a detail that I don't know the absolute answer to, possibly, but certainly you have to say that it was in a cask that previously had peated whiskey.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't think there's a requirement to say.
I don't think so either, but I could be easily just as wrong. Another one here, again, it refers to, I suppose it was not a typo, but the fact that this may help accommodate particularly the smaller distilleries. So there's a reference to pot stills, as in plural of pot stills, whereas you want amendments there that's saying one or more pot stills. So you don't have to have 2 or 3 pot stills necessarily. And then referring to the size, again, there was a bit of, I guess, open to ambiguity, and also maybe favoring some of the bigger producers in the reference to the size of the pot still has been removed.
And I think that was something that was, typically in large pot stills or something that was used in that way. It was an unnecessary inclusion, I think, at the time, and everybody recognized that. And again, going back to the requirement to have 3 stills to make triple distilled whiskey, it's not a requirement. It can be, as long as distilled 3 times, to call it triple distilled whiskey, it can go through one single pot still 3 different times.
Okay. Color, again, this was one of those vague things. Basically, I think this is basically saying that the color can pick up other hues due to the influence of the cast. So the cast doesn't have to be from pale gold to dark amber specifically. Again,
and again, you'd say as time has moved on and we've all started to mature and finish in different cask styles, you're getting very different whiskey hues. Last Friday I was down in Dingle at the Dingle Whiskey Society, and we had 5 whiskies for tasting, and I just commented, like, look at these 5 whiskies, 5 completely different colors, completely different hues for one, and all produced in Irish distilleries, 2 different Irish distilleries, all different ages, all different types of whiskies.
Well, we had one of yours last week, the Rouge, of course, which is almost red.
And exactly the point I made at the time, because I brought a bottle of Rouge to that tasting, and I think that, like, the pinky hue that comes from that red wine, those red wine casks, is very significant. So to restrict the color in the way that was done in the original file was certainly well intentioned, and seemed to incorporate from pale gold, dark amber, a lot of different, but it was required to include other hues, that could come out from the casks.
Okay. Now what's the next one? Milling. So this is, again, one of the things that, I mean, there are, those that say the small distilleries and small producers are not getting a word in. I think a lot of the changes certainly benefit the smaller producer. And this is one of them now, basically saying that the milling, basically the grinding of the barley into a powder, is doesn't have to take place on site. So they can source milled barley or milled cereals.
Yeah, and this was work that was done by the previous technical committee, actually, in the 2 years previous to that, and was agreed by the members, and was agreed by the Department of Agriculture and Food. And so it wasn't something that was subject to the technical file discussion, but it was felt that it should be formally put into the technical file so that it would be understood and written down and recognized. And you're right, it is recognition that for a small distillery operation to be involved in different types of milling or milled grains, they might have to have more than one mill, and that actually could be really expensive for them. So that was a recognition that for membership. And what you said there, people will say it's about the big companies and all that. We need to really recognize that the big companies have 1 vote each, and the small companies have 1 vote each. And in the 15 companies that sat on this committee for the technical file review, there were 3 votes from big companies and there were 12 votes from small companies. You know what I mean? I think and therefore it's something that is a little bit frustrating for me when I hear people saying the Irish Whiskey Association is about the big companies. The Irish Whiskey Association is very much about the small companies. And if I was to just explain something to you, that in all of the webinars that we did in the last year, and our own company was involved, we had our East Africa manager talk about the opportunity in Kenya and the surrounding countries. And that was, if you like, the collegiality of us sharing our expertise in markets with people who wouldn't have that expertise and who couldn't afford to pay for it. And that's what, and then there will be smaller companies who will share their expertise with me in a way that I might not know tiny areas of in investment requirements, or the use of crowdfunding, for example, that I've seen James Doherty and Elliot Hughes talk about how they funded. That's brilliant stuff that I wouldn't have had to be involved in as a bigger company. So that whole sharing of information and the collegiality thing we talked about is very much part of what we do, but it's very much not directed in favor of one size company or another.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important that message is, shared with people, because, I think very much we're very, very fortunate in that the larger companies have recognized the fact that lifting the category as a whole is hugely significant for the industry, not just for
And I've
themselves.
said it 100 times, sir, just to you and to others, that what we need as an industry is for the smaller companies to survive and thrive, because we want an industry that everybody is talking about around the world, where you can go to different parts of Ireland and see big and small distilleries and see cute and interesting distilleries and see distilleries that really step up to make top quality whiskey in a bigger way, maybe like ours or in Middleton or Bushmills, whatever. So there's room for everybody. Not only is there room for everybody, I personally want to see all of those guys, and I visited some recently, see them thrive, because they're magnificent exhibitions of human endeavor of Irish people who have wonderful love for Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
And for me, that's key.
Yeah. Well, I think, even in the association's discussions and amongst, the diversity is hugely important. But I suppose one of the, and I guess I'm finished with this technical file kind of, so let me just get this out of the way so we can see a bigger.
So you really want
to? And you can see me bigger, which nobody will want either. But look, thank you for going through that. There were a couple of things there that I won't say they were left out, but there are things I guess that maybe need to be addressed, and things we hear a lot of concerns about, and I guess maybe labeling would be one of them. So in terms of coloring, in terms of whether the liquid was sourced and where it was sourced from. Now, I'm not a proponent of saying where it was sourced from necessarily, but certainly saying that it was sourced. And I know there are some developments going on in labeling at the moment. Can you fill us in on that?
So, yes, I can fill you in the sense that there are different opinions on this, and significantly different opinions. I think where we should be coming from is that we don't want to confuse consumers. We want to be as transparent as we can possibly be. There might be a case for the transparency being aligned with the kind of transparency that is available from Scotland, for example. That's a case that some people would say that we should be align ourselves with how the Scots do it. There's that. There's the other point, which is that the Department of Agriculture and Food have become the monitors of, or the approvers of labels, the monitors of labels, etc., having taken over from FSAI on the 1st of January this year. And their interpretation of the EU spirits drinks regulations is different from what the Irish Whisky Association's interpretations were. And so there has been a coming together of, let's see why we interpret them differently. And where we're at now is we can't give, and Department of Agriculture and Food can't give a definitive, this is what you must do, because there are too many permutation combinations of people. So it's in a roundtable discussion now, with lots of people feeding in on how they think this could be resolved, with a view to the consumer not at all being confused by things, and with a view to an understanding that the industry has developed and has evolved over the last 30 years in particular, 2010 even, you might say. So people are sitting around the table to discuss. And indeed, you might say, well, what does agriculture and food want? And even agriculture and food now feel there's a need for more clarity so that we can say, absolutely, this is what should happen in the future. And that we would be aligned with that. And that's where it's at. There's a lot of people in discussion. And don't forget, we have DEFRA involved in the north. We have the UK authorities involved in the north. So there has to be a lot of minds coming together on this to an agreed way forward.
Yeah. I've heard of an issue possibly about, and this comes really from a Brexit issue. So what are the implications of Brexit on any of these definitions and recognition of the GI?
There is none, actually, and the good news, the reason for that is that the British government, the Department of their DEFRA department, has given in writing to the Irish Whisky Association a recognition that the GI of Irish whiskey will be recognized in all future trade deals that they do. That any trade deals that they will negotiate, Irish whiskey will be as defined by the GI and as recognized already. So that,
and is that both ways, John? So is the European Union recognizing product that is produced in the north as being Irish whiskey, and there are not any issues there in terms of maybe blending with malt from up north?
So the European Union are a bit harder on it than the British government.
Yeah.
Actually, the European Union are saying if it's from outside the EU, then we need to look at it. So, but we're in discussions with our colleagues in government in Dublin and people within Spirits Europe, and getting the Commission to see that it's about trade agreements rather than definitions, and it's about saying that if you have a trade agreement with a country, for example, you pick a country like Taiwan. I'm just picking a country off the top of my head. If you have a free trade agreement with Taiwan, and there's some whiskey that's in a blend that's come from another part of Ireland, then it cannot be regarded as a full Irish whiskey. And the EU would be saying, well, can we stand over that as a full Irish whiskey, or is there some part from outside the EU? And therefore, if the tariffs on products that are not from EU, should there be some tariffs applied to that? And that's in discussion, but it's only in the context of trade agreements, not in the context of the definition of the GI.
Yeah, so it's not a technical obstacle, but it does have duty implications.
It could have big implications, but at the moment it's only got implications in markets where Irish whiskey is not an established category.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that we're less serious about it.
Yes.
We are very serious about it. And it's even, that's not 100% accurate, because it could have implications in markets like South Africa, for example. Now, the tariff that would be applied would be not huge, so it shouldn't change the nature of the demand supply nature of Irish whiskey, let's say, in terms of it shouldn't swing away from it, but the principle wouldn't be helpful. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Other things then on labeling, is there going to be an insistence that that it is sourced?
So there's a lot of discussion around this, and I'll give you an example. So if you don't distill the spirit, but you do mature it, and you do finish it, and you do bottle it, or if you do two of those and not the other two, is that sourced? Is that produced by? Is it produced for? Etc. Etc. So that's where I was saying there isn't an agreement yet on exact terminology, because there's a recognition in the department now that there are different aspects to the production of Irish whiskey. So if you're producing vodka, it's in one end, out the other end, into a bottle. When you're producing Irish whiskey, so where do the main proponents of the production process lie? So where do the flavor components for Irish whiskey come from? You know, the debate is obviously around, is it from the grains? Is it from the distillation, from the fermentation process, from the distillation process? Is it the congeners that follow all through all of that? Or is it how much influence has the maturation procedure? So if you're spending all your life maturing whiskies that you source from a distillery, then if you distill your whiskey, but you don't mature it, it's matured by somebody else somewhere else, does that mean that it's, you have to put that on the labels? There's too many possibilities and combinations.
There's a lot of permutations, but I'm thinking I'm trying to think from a consumer point of view, John, and I'm trying to see it from their point of view, as opposed to, I get it from a producer's point of view. Is it perhaps overplayed or overthought of that? If it is known to be sourced, do you think people will think lower of the product?
Not necessarily, but it's the point of the people who own the businesses, and they're saying, so I do an awful lot for this spirit when it comes to me. I give it the character that it has. I give it the flavor profile that it has. How can you say that I'm not the producer? How can I say I'm not the producer? So It's that is the tension against which, and then there'll be some producers who are producing for people, and they don't necessarily want their name on the bottle because it's.
I get that. I get that. So I mean, if we take aside the naming of the brand, because obviously to protect your own integrity, you can't be responsible necessarily for what happens down the line, whether you butcher a spirit or not. But I mean, just to say maybe produced using source spirit, or or something.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be elaborate, but that's the kind of calls I've seen. But yeah, I'm sure it'll get all ironed out over the next. I presume that's going to be a long discussion, John. Is it?
It is a long discussion, and it's one that we're actively involved in, and it's one that we're open to complete and transparent discussions with the department on this. It's not one we're running away from. It's not one we're hiding from. But within our membership, there are significantly differing views on this.
No, I get that. Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, what we all want is an agreed understanding of what any terminology we use means in a way that the consumer will understand it.
Yeah. And will the consumers' opinions and thoughts be considered by the government in that as well? I know, obviously, the producers are, but is there a voice for the consumer heard in those discussions?
So if I was to say to you that the guys who met with the FSAI initially in the couple of years ago were astonished that the one thing that the FSAI didn't take into account was the producer. It was all about the consumer's opinion. There was no consideration of you as a producer, of the intricacies of the whiskey industry or the different stages, etc. So it was all about the consumer, and that's very much followed through by the guys in Department of Agriculture and Food. So I would not worry about the consumer's interest here, because sorry, not that I worry. I wouldn't worry that
they're not represented.
They're very much represented, very, very much represented, and rightly so. At the end of the day, we've had this discussion. If we lose our consumers, then it's not enough for the readers of Irish Whiskey Magazine. I've always used this example that the readers of Irish Whiskey Magazine wouldn't have put 4 expensive kids through college for me, and they won't pay the salaries of the many thousands of people who are working in the industry, because we, readers of Irish Whiskey Magazine, are we're a narrow group, a small group of people who love Irish whiskey, but we don't drink the bulk of it. So the consumer that Joe Blogs on the street is going by has to be happy, and we have to keep them happy, or her.
Yeah, I just think it's certainly something that is becoming more, and it's not only in whiskey, of course. People want traceability of everything. They want to know where your beef is from and everything else. But
farm to fork,
yeah. So look, I think you have to be commended, the whole group, in reaching the consensus that they did in a relatively short period of time. I have to say, from the beginning of the year to now, in a very different, in very difficult circumstances, or maybe that helped focus the mind as well. So
the guys who sat on that committee worked really hard. Noel Sweeney whipped them into shape. The guys from Middleton were brilliantly participative. You had people like Peter Mulryan on it. You had the guys from Liberties. You had guys from Teelings everywhere. They've all. I don't want to be naming it, but all participating with a view to arriving at a document that stood up in terms of its integrity and represented views across the board, and was a unanimously approved document from all of those guys. So full marks to them. I wasn't on that committee, as I say. They wouldn't let me in, but they conduct themselves brilliantly. I commend them.
No, I think they have to be hugely commended, and congratulations. And of course, those that have done the research and those that have helped participate in it all. But it's great now that we potentially have a new technical file. I'm thrilled to bits.
Yeah.
What the one challenge I think is, pot still is, we highlight as uniquely Irish, but it's been a very difficult process to share the message of what pot still Irish whiskey is. Are we now in a situation where because it's even more diverse, there's more possibilities, more combinations, that we have an even more challenging role. And is there something in place to address that?
So let's say this. The fact that we have a pot still category that will be more embracing of tradition, more embracing of innovation, offering different flavor profiles for different reasons, has to be a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I give my big competitor in Middleton, Irish Distillers, you've got to give them huge credit. They have done fantastic work in producing wonderful pot still whiskies and in marketing them to the world very well. So we have got from them very fertile ground for development of this category. And we're all of us, let's say, as an industry, we're all significantly blessed that we have that fertile ground on which to work. And so I'm not worried that it in any way does anything apart from gives us even more opportunity. What I would say is that there's still, the consumer doesn't understand pot still whiskey. The consumer, I promise you this, you talk to the average consumer, we do a lot of research and insights type research. You talk to a consumer about single malt scotch, they know they like it. They know the brand they like, but they don't know what it means. They do not know what it means. And you talk to any of your friends who are not interested in whiskey and ask them, do they know what single malt means? They don't know.
Yeah.
Now,
but they'll want it though.
What?
But they'll want it and ask for it.
Absolutely, they'll want it, which is fantastic. So the opportunity to talk about pot still whiskey is there for us all. It's even more diverse than it was, and therefore the marketing of the idea of pot still whiskey in the way that, you know, people have said, will it be the Irish version of Scotch single malt? Hopefully, and it's going in that direction, and it might even be more significant. Who knows in the future? But it's unique to us. It's something that we value and protect. We nod to the lads in Middleton, and we say, and the rest of us now can benefit from that.
Yeah. Look, I don't think it's an understatement to say that they've played a hugely pivotal and significant role in, I would say, protecting something that could have been lost, and also engaging now to diversify it even further. So, I mean, there is one side. There are two sides to it. One is that the fact that we are truer to our tradition. The definition is more accurate to what it should be, but it also gives us the opportunity for more innovation going forward. Now, we've talked about innovation, I think, John, ourselves many times, and you know, you can innovate with being innovate and produce something rubbish as well. So I guess that's one concern I would have to flag, is that, you know, because there are so many possibilities now, we could end up matching, smoked salmon with crispy fries or something. You know, it's almost so. I guess there's some care that's needed there. But what else is there likely to be of interest then, do you think, with this technical file that needs to be addressed? Do you think that's it? That's pretty much everything covered?
I think it is. I mean, the lads spent a lot of time on it. There was a lot of build up to it. There was a lot of, talk on between social media and other ways by people who had Irish whiskey's interest at heart, who weren't sitting on committees in the Irish Association, who felt this needs to be addressed. They were listened to, heard. Some sat on the committee and were, had a good platform to voice the sense of lost opportunity or missed opportunity or future opportunity to be pounced on. And I think we've got to that point, and that was, pot still was one, obviously, and a key one, maybe the key one. But the others were brought into the fold as well and said, now that we're here, let's look at everything so we don't have to revisit this every 2 years. But you know, Sergius, in 7 years' time, somebody might say, wait a minute, 7 years later, we maybe need to relook at this. And
I think that's important to point out as well, John, that the technical file is a live, breathing document that must adapt. And I think the GI allows us to evaluate the technical file, like you said earlier, without making too many significant changes. But
Yeah.
I think it's important that we keep looking at. I wouldn't like to see the technical poll having to change in a couple of years so quickly, but look, it may arise. I may find a recipe, of using quinoa or quinoa, sorry, or rice or something somewhere. But these things are meant to evolve. But I think that's what makes the Irish whiskey category. And for me, the importance of the change is the fact that we are willing to adapt and diversify even further than we have, and to take on something that gives us more permutations. But the ability to be able to adapt. I mean, we're opening up on our cask definitions and maturation and so forth, but it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I don't think we should seek to change the technical file whenever it suits us. I think we should do what we just did now, which was incorporate every possible view, review and respect the historical research that was done, and recognize the integrity of that with a view to informing the document. So, and if there's another Fionn O'Connor who's going to annoy the hell out of me in 7 years' time, then I'm prepared to listen to him because if he's as good as Fionn is, then we're all going to listen. So absolutely, we're in the situation where we have a document now that stacks up, and if that it does, we should be prepared to allow it breathe and to allow it to live, and allow Irish whiskies to do the same.
Yeah, I think this is a question here from Frank, and I think you kind of answered it by pointing out the importance of the GI. But he says, do we need to define styles rigidly, or just speak of Irish whiskey and let each distillery tell their own story of process and flavor?
I think what we're trying to do is probably a little bit of both. In order to have GI status, and that gives us huge access to markets and protects us against counterfeit whiskies, for example. In the biggest Irish whiskey markets in the world, we're protected because of what we've done here. So we have to have rigid definitions in the sense that people reading it will say, that's worthy of a GI. Being worthy of a GI, it's worthy of protection, and people can't mess around with the category. It doesn't take away from the different distilleries' requirement, opportunity, and even the beauty of distillery telling its own character, because within Scotland, single malts are very rigidly defined, the single malt category. But my goodness, there's a range of single malts in Scotland, and Frank, I'm sure, knows, that are so wide and so far reaching in flavor profile terms that it doesn't hold it back. So I think you can do both.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue that we have even more possibilities to be more diverse, and for distilleries to find their own niche now with this new amendment. So
and many of them are also doing that already and finding a way of doing their things. And when you sit with the different distillers or the people who are involved in maturation from the distilleries, it's inspiring to hear what they're thinking of, what they're planning, what they're looking at. And I was with the guys from Ecklenville on Friday, and they were talking about Palo Cortado cask. I'm saying, okay, that's something that's really interesting, So everybody will have its own signature style.
No, I think so. Yeah, and there's more space in there now. Look, obviously the star of the show, I guess, has been the pot still definition, but there are other ones in there that are pretty important, especially for some of the smaller ones. And what I like is that some of the vagaries, like some of the very general terms that were used that are used in the technical file are hopefully going to be addressed as well. So I didn't include those because there were quite a few of them, and they were a little bit boring, if I don't say it. But so particularly, unusually, or typical, or kind of described in there. They're very vague terms. So
and I think those type of things have been largely taken out where they didn't recognize reality or historical significance.
Yeah. If we take away from the technical file there just for a moment, I want to discuss the trade war possibilities, or the trade wars that were in danger of happening with the US. Are they gone now under this new government?
So they're not completely gone, as in there's still the possibility that they could be resurrected. Certain hoops have to be gone through. I mean, what we know is that the trade wars have nothing to do with Irish whiskey. They're to do with Boeing and steel and aluminium. So, and the two separate trade wars. And the only thing is they come up for discussion every so often. I think there's one due actually in the next 2 or 3 months that needs to be defined and finally agreed. It was the final agreement on it was postponed till December, as far as I know. And you know, there's a great, as I understand it, there's a great interest both sides of the Atlantic to get these things resolved, but they're complicated. They're not, you know, straightforward. And when the WTO gets involved, there's all kinds of potential fines and sanctions, etc. So nobody wants to be fighting. And I think with, you know, to look to the US now, there's a greater sense of we need to get this resolved. It's not that they're less nationalistic about it, because in fact, Joe Biden comes from a part of the world where steel and aluminium are very important. So he's not going to, and the workers in that industry are very important to him. So it's not going to be an easy fix. But there's a general, I think, from what I hear, there's a general sense of we need to solve this rather than we need to stand off against each other.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think one of the big things, if you're going to be, you still got a year and a bit to go though. So I'm not saying, you know,
what else? What do the next year and a bit? Like
you're going to go back to Portugal and line this, or actually, are you going to end up doing some work for grants and get back to travel?
At some stage, the Tullamore DEW team are going to want me to do some work for them. But no, look, I'm very lucky in that I work for a company that allows me the time to take time for the Irish Whisky Association. The company, to be fair, recognizes the significance of what the Irish Whisky Association does for the industry, because the company knows the Scotch Whisky Association very well, and they know the importance and significance of that to the industry in Scotland. And so they more than encourage me to work at this and do whatever I have to do. I am very lucky with the Tullamore DEW team that I work with in terms of the marketing team and production team. I have to give due recognition to Kevin Piggott. He does a lot of the heavy lifting now in terms of the promotion and advocacy type work that I would have spent a lot of my time doing. So give a nod of, I sometimes slag him off, but in fact give a nod of appreciation to him. And I'm very lucky in that sense. And the other thing is that I'm trying to do is to get around to different distilleries that I haven't visited yet and spend some time. And in fact, last week I was down in Dingle, but I was also down in Blackwater Distillery, and I had a lovely look around there with Peter and seeing what he's doing there. So I'm trying to get a bit of that done on a regular basis, so that I'll see people not just through Zoom, but or through virtual meetings, but I'll actually see them in their place of worship, and I'll kneel at their altar and pray with them,
pinch their ideas and.
Yes, absolutely. I'm writing notes after everything. Absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, what's going to be the reaction, do you think, from the Scotch Whisky Association in what we're doing? Do you see them starting to amend their technical files?
They have done that already. They've had reviews of their technical file themselves in the past. So what we would be doing would be not only not be a surprise to them, they would be, you know, recognizing of the need for that, for the adaptation of that. So they've done that, and we're very lucky. I mean, I'm very lucky. I work with people in Scotland who are very close to the Scotch Whisky Association. So do I pick their brains or do we compare notes? Probably the latter. You know, we compare notes, and it's helpful to understand. We certainly don't follow what they do in terms of copying them, but we follow the thrust of what it is for them are the important issues, and for them, you know, the tariffs, the US tariffs were hugely significant. For us, they were significant, but particularly for the Northern Ireland whiskies. But generally, we got away with it without too much trouble, you know. So yeah, we know them well, very well. We're close to them.
Yeah. Can I ask you, since you'll be taking a bit of a breather, when is the visitor centre opening up in Tullamore?
I can't tell you, that's a secret, but probably in the new year. It's entirely possible that somebody very important, like yourself, might get a visit to see it before Christmas. But I think it would be the new year before there's an awful lot of work being done at the moment. And again, Kevin is heavily involved in this. Kathy, who you know, is heavily involved.
Yeah.
So they're working really hard at getting the final sort of the agreed design finally implemented and operational. But there will be a bit of time needed to debug the system, etc. So I suspect in December we'll be maybe having a look at it and seeing what we think, and then probably in the new year it'll become open to consumers, I say, to enthusiasts.
Yeah.
I've told you way more than I should have told you there, because I'd say
we've kind of got a timeline. I was hoping it would have been the summer, but we waited this long. But
they regularly forgive the old guy for putting his foot in it, you know. So
I don't know. I think it's great. I think it was great that the industry, the association, the consumer had somebody with, if I dare say so, the statesmanship and the approachability that was required in a very challenging time. So,
the lines on the face, is that what you're saying?
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but look, I think it's been fantastic what's happened. Obviously, this has been big news, and we're looking forward to seeing what the fruits of all this hard work are going to bring. But it can only be positive. One thing I do want to do, and one thing I love doing, talking to you for, is when you say goodbye, because you give the best toasts of anybody. So perhaps before you go, you might give us a nice toast.
Listen, like I've learned toasts from the likes of Piggott. You know, he teaches, and in fact, some of the toasts he teaches me, I could not repeat on.
All right, okay.
On global television,
younger generation, you know.
Yeah, please, and like I keep saying, don't say that one, and of course, because I say it, he does, you know, and embarrasses the hell out of me. But anyway, I suppose in the context of what we're saying, here's to what is it? Is it?
You weren't at this before, were you?
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, I'll give you the other one. Here's the drinking. Here's the cheating, stealing, fighting, and drinking. If you cheat, may you cheat death. If you steal, may you steal a heart. If you fight, may you fight for a brother. And if you drink, may you drink with me. Sláinte.
Sláinte, John. Thank you very much. Congratulations to all the team, everybody that was involved, and thank you for explaining everything so well and so clearly for all of us.
Good.
And best of luck.
I always enjoy the crack. Thanks very much, Sláinte.
Thank you very much. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Well, there you go. I enjoyed that one. I enjoyed the show. I hope it gave a bit of transparency and a bit of a eye-opening as to what is possible and what could come down the road. I think it's been a really tough year to get through and produce the amendments. Hopefully they'll be listened to. I know there are other bodies that will have their own opinion on things. I think collectively we're in for a really exciting future, and I'd like to thank John, his team, everybody. I suppose a credit, of course, must go to those that are being big proponents of these changes, none less so than Fiona, none more so than Fiona O'Connor, of course. But, I mentioned a few names. And look, we'll be covering the technical file, the amendments in the new issue as well, which will be out beginning of November. And thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Look forward to speaking to you next week with something rather special next week. And take care and sláinte. Good night.